Born to Annoy, From Rebel to Revolutionary, Chapter 8, John Forrester. Karl Marx once wrote words to the effect that individuals determine their own history, but not in circumstances of their own choosing. A wise old man was our Cowle, as I was soon to find out. I slotted into the drawing office at Madden's like a fish to water. The factory was completely different from AEI or Openshaw, employing no more than about 50 people. The drawing office personnel consisted of 4 draftsmen and 1 apprentice, the latter being a young lad of 17, Simon by name. Only one of the adults was a union member, the eldest. The acknowledged head of the team was a young, talented man of about 26 years, Ken. There was also a chief draftsman, although he didn't work in the office. Indeed, we saw little of him, although when I had met him at my job interview, he seemed a pleasant enough individual. The products manufactured by the company were equally new to me, namely air-operated hydraulic pumps used in many and various industrial applications. One of the first jobs I was given, working along with Bob, the eldest of the team, was the design of a 2000 psi pressure vessel for a company based in Ireland, the Shannon Diamond and Carbide Company, if I remember correctly. They manufactured synthetic industrial diamonds for drill and machine tool cutting tips. I also worked on equipment for automatically and remotely handling the fuel rods in nuclear reactors. To cut a long story short, my decision to seek new experience seemed to have been a correct one, and the company I had landed with, the right one. The work was diverse and interesting. I had to learn about new materials and new technology. The team I was part of were enthusiastic about their work and were constantly looking for new applications to which their products could be adapted. Robotics was in its infancy in those days, but it soon became clear to me that the devices we designed and manufactured had a significant role to play in the future development of automated machinery. My colleagues were helpful to me, and like many I'd met before, eager to pass on their experience and knowledge. I also quickly made the acquaintance of a young woman, a typist, who lived in nearby Timberley village. She was a slim, dark-haired, brown-eyed beauty, Susan by name, and we soon clicked. We began regular dating. So, in my 23rd year, life could not have been better. I thoroughly enjoyed my work, which was in itself a boon all too many workers are denied. My social life was full and exciting, and I had my bike to travel further afield. At this point it is probably a good idea to contrast the Broadheath area of Altrincham with the industrial township of Higher Openshaw. The latter place is centred around the crossroads, the junction of Ashton Hall Road and Ogden Lane, Fairfield Street. Ogden Lane runs south from the old road to Gorton, whilst Fairfield Street continues on the opposite side to Droylsden. The Ashton Old Road is the main thoroughfare running from near Manchester town centre through Bradford and Lower Openshaw, east to Ashton Underline, about 7.5 miles total distance, Higher Openshaw being about 5 miles from the town centre. In 1967, almost the whole length of this main thoroughfare, up to the crossroads in Higher Openshaw, was lined with factories, most of which were heavy and medium engineering, many bearing the names of famous and pioneering engineers of the Industrial Revolution, Massey and Whitworth amongst them. In other words, Openshaw was about as industrialised a place as you can imagine, as were the townships to its north and south. Altrincham, on the other hand, and in sharp contrast, was a significant Cheshire market town to the southwest of Manchester, lying on what had been the old Roman road from Manchester to Chester, or, to be more historically accurate, the other way round. In Roman times, Manchester was only a small Roman castrum or fort at the confluences of the River Irwell and Medlock, built to guard this self-same road, which, in the area now known as Castlefield, divided in two, one route heading northwest across the Irwell to Ribchester, and the other northeast, travelling alongside the Medlock at first, and then across the Pennines to York. Manchester's name in Roman times was Mamuseum, which was a Latinisation of its then Celtic name, meaning breast-shaped hill. On the other side of Altrincham town lay the open, undulating countryside of rural Cheshire, stretching to Chester and the mountains of North Wales, with the two great landed estates of Tatton Park and Dunham Massey not too far from its border. Broadheath was a small industrial suburb on the Manchester edge of Altrincham, its factories lining either side of the Broadheath Canal. Maddens was situated on Atlantic Street, running west off the Chester Road and parallel with the canal on its Manchester side. It was one of a number of small factories, specialising in different components, some of which were complementary. For example, the factory next door to Maddens manufactured fine quality investment castings, and they supplied components to Maddens for their air-operated hydraulic pumps. The two largest companies were Linotype, manufacturers of printing machinery, situated on the opposite side of the canal from our factory, and Churchill Machine Tools at the far end of Atlantic Street, more commonly known as Churchill Richards. My place of work was approximately 7 or 8 miles from my home in Gorton, and I could travel there by bus or train, Manchester being blessed with cheap and regular services by both means of transport. Nonetheless, the preferred option was by bike, and this was the method I tended to utilise. Quite often, particularly in summer and autumn, I would leave work and head for Chester before returning home, assuming I hadn't arranged to meet Susan in the stonemasons in Timperley, and had promised to accompany her to the cinema. Thus my life proceeded quietly and most satisfactorily for about 6 months, at which point in time I made a discovery. To my surprise, because I thought my employers to be of a rather fair, indeed of a somewhat paternalistic nature, it turned out the apprentice was being paid well below the wage rates agreed between the Confederation of Engineering and Shipbuilding Unions and the Engineering Employers Federation. Moreover, I knew that Maddens were members of the Federation because their letterheads proclaimed it to be the case, and I wouldn't have accepted employment with a non-federated firm unless they had guaranteed me a salary well above the level of national wage agreements. My first conclusion was that this was purely an oversight, and all I needed to do was draw it to the attention of the chief draftsman. Accordingly, I did so, and he assured me he would take it up with the managing director. To my astonishment, the company refused point blank to rectify the situation. I now faced a dilemma. Only Bob amongst the adults was a union member beside me, and the apprentice wasn't a member. I could have said, "I'm all right, Jack, tough shit. If you haven't got the sense to join the union, you don't deserve the benefits," and left it at that. However, you, dear reader, will have gathered by now that was not in my nature. Although religion had played little, if any, part in my nurturing, I had benefited from a good moral upbringing. Auntie Dolly had taught me to stand up for my rights, but she'd also taught me that rights also incur responsibilities, and one of those responsibilities was to work to ensure that those worse off than you should be assisted and helped to achieve a position whereby they could also enjoy the same rights. Moreover, my friend Maggie had confirmed the moral correctness of this outlook. The condition for the advancement of each should be the advancement of all, being her thoroughly communistic motto. I rang the union office for advice, and this led to my meeting a man who had as profound an impact on my life as Red Maggie already had. He arranged to meet me that evening in the Data Divisional Office, which was then in a building in Spring Gardens in Manchester town centre. John Forrester turned out to be a big man, big in stature and in personality. He was a Glaswegian, trained as a draftsman in the hard school of the Clydeside shipyards, and, as I was to discover, a man who was as trustworthy as he was intellectually capable, and John was nobody's fool. I explained the situation to him, including the fact that only Bob and I were union members. He nodded, but in turn explained that could present a difficulty. Technically, he informed me, He could only act on behalf of union members, and the apprentice was not a member. The fact he'd used the term technically exercised my creative mind. If you contact the Engineering Employees Federation, you don't have to inform them he's not a union member, I responded. Not only that, whilst the other two draftsmen aren't members, they are sympathetic to the lad's case. They think it's grossly unfair. I reckon if the management are forced to pay the lad, he and the adults will have the confidence to join the union. John laughed. The only thing fair in this world is the weather, and even then it's only infrequently fair. There's nothing fair about wage slavery or any system based on the principle of buy cheap and sell dear. It's a form of theft, even if it is legalised and approved by both state and church. He looked at me, a smile on his face. Nonetheless, we'll give it a go. My mind's in tune with yours. I thanked him and stood up to leave. Hang on a minute. We've not finished. Now, from what you've said, you've officially raised the issue with the management. Yeah, I suppose so. Right, so that means we're into the next step of the agreed negotiating procedure. I'll contact the Engineering Employees Federation and request a works conference, and unless there's some special circumstance we are not aware of when the conference takes place, the Federation representative will make it clear the company either abides by the national agreement or ceases to be a member of the Federation. Do you reckon it'll be as straightforward as that? Of course the issue's clear-cut. All members of the Engineering Employees Federation are bound by their agreements, just as we are. However, I need you to accompany me, along with Bob, if you can persuade him. The two of you, in effect, comprise the Data Office Committee, and therefore you officially are the negotiators. I am merely your spokesman and adviser, the equivalent of your lawyer if you were in court. This I hadn't expected. Visions of my meeting with old Paddlehouse passed before me. Nonetheless, I'd survived that. In for a penny, in for a pound. I agreed to talk to Bob, but assured John if he had cold feet, I'd act as spokesman for the office committee. I shouldn't have worried. Bob and I elected ourselves as official office committee members and held our first meeting one dinner hour. He nominated me as secretary and I nominated him as chairman. We duly seconded each other, and there being no objections received, we were both unanimously elected, with the participation of all the Data members, to the aforesaid positions of responsibility. Eventually the Works Conference took place, and I made out our case to the local representative of the Engineering Employees Federation, with the Managing Director, the Company Secretary and the Chief Draftsman representing the employer's side. I discovered later the normal procedure was for John to make the case on behalf of the members, but he decided to test my negotiating skills while sitting beside me ready to intervene if necessary. The Engineering Employees Federation spokesman requested an adjournment, which we were more than happy to concede. When the meeting resumed, the company secretary informed us the firm had had a change of heart. They conceded our claim in full and gave us an assurance they would abide by all present and future national agreements. The chief draftsman gave me a smile and a friendly wink. Unfortunately, the managing director had absented himself from the meeting. The apprentice was naturally delighted and immediately requested an application form to join the union, as did the two non-union adults. We suddenly moved to being a 100% union membership drawing office, thanks to a managing director with rather backward and stubborn instincts. My friend Bob was overjoyed. He'd been the sole flag carrier for Data in that factory for some 20 years. Susan gave me a special hug because she was a friend of the apprentice's sister and asked me if there was a union for clerical workers. I promised I'd find out, and I did, eventually providing her with the contact details for the clerical and administrative workers union. She and two other typists and a filing clerk subsequently joined that organisation. Meanwhile, I began to attend the Altrincham branch of Data, and at the annual general meeting volunteered to undertake the role of treasurer, and was duly elected by the members to do so. Here I met a young man named Peter, who worked at Linotype and held office as branch secretary. If my memory serves me correct, he was a practicing Christian, and his religious beliefs had led him into membership of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament and the anti-apartheid movement. Politically, he was on the left, like me, and we became friends. Unbeknownst to me, whilst assisting the organisation of my fellows, I was making a rod for my own back, a rod that would be wielded with force and precision in the not-too-distant future. Maggie had of course forewarned me in no uncertain terms, but I had forgotten the warning. I was about to learn a valuable lesson in more ways than one. The managing director's timing was perfect. He summoned me into his office on the Friday, 2 weeks prior to the Christmas of 1967. Unfortunately, we are running out of orders. You, I am pleased to say, are sacked. I felt weak at the knees, but then soon realised my situation could be far worse. I was young and full of energy. There was plenty of work to be had, and hundreds of firms where I could seek it. I had my bike, so I could travel. Madden's loss would be somebody else's gain. However, history was to take another twist. I wasn't the only player in this game, and neither was my vindictive managing director. I informed the lads of my sacking and told them I'd phone the union office and see if any jobs were going during my dinner break. I walked into Broadheath and enjoyed a meal at a greasy spoon, catering for the likes of me, the unemployed, troublemakers, assorted vagabonds and rogues. Then I phoned the union from a call box. John Forrester was not in the office, but his secretary assured me she would inform him I'd called. In any case, Malcolm, please come into the office on Monday morning. John has a meeting in the afternoon, but he'll be pleased to see you beforehand. It never struck me at the time how she knew my name. I hadn't mentioned it, and we'd never met. I returned to the office just before 1, took off my jacket and slung it across the back of my chair, ready to start work. The lads looked grim-faced but remained silent. The bell rang, signalling the end of the dinner hour. Ken, the lead draftsman, put on his jacket and coat, and so did the rest. Come on, Malc, Ken said. We can't go on strike and leave you here blacklegging. We're meeting John Forrester at 2 in the navigation. I couldn't believe it. They'd held a meeting whilst I was eating and then contacted the union and advised John they were going on strike and why. He'd been in the office when I phoned, but hadn't wanted to give away their surprise. I thanked my friends, but protested against their decision. Maggie had always taught me that strike action should always be the weapon of last resort. Furthermore, as she pointed out, it was a pretty useless weapon if it didn't stop production more or less instantly, and draftsmen worked many months in advance of production. I assured my colleagues I could easily find employment, whilst they would be jeopardising their future and in the run-up to Christmas too. Their families would not be happy. I didn't want to be responsible for unnecessary domestic arguments and domestic crises. Anyway, a strike could last 6 months and more. It was stupid and not necessary. Bob informed me I was being victimised for sticking my neck out on their behalf, and they felt it was their duty to stand by me. I pointed out they couldn't prove I was being victimised. There was a shortage of work, and I was the last to be employed, and so I had to expect to be the first to lose my job. Ken told me I was an innocent abroad. I thought this statement was a bit of a cheek, seeing as he was the new member rather than me, but he soon enlightened me. I had a meeting on Wednesday morning with the chief draftsman to discuss the work for the forthcoming month, as we always do. They not only have a full order book, they're planning on employing 2 more draftsmen sometime in the new year. That's how we know for sure it's victimisation. Thus the die was cast. I bowed to far superior forces, armed with a superior will and reinforced by a superior argument. Accordingly, I reconciled myself, reluctantly, to participation in my first strike.